In the heart of this tragic tale were three individuals: John Reynolds, a former Marine and dedicated husband; Emily Reynolds, his affectionate yet often lonely wife; and Father Mark, a charismatic and enigmatic priest. Their lives, once ordinary, became intertwined in a web of deception and heartache that would haunt the serene town of Meadowbrook forever. John and Emily Reynolds appeared to be the perfect couple. Married for over a decade, they had built a life grounded in stability and mutual respect. John, a highly regarded ex-Marine, was known for his discipline and integrity, while Emily, a devoted stay-at-home mother, was loved by her community for her warmth and commitment to local activities. Their seemingly happy marriage was a foundation for their social circle, admired by friends and neighbors alike. However, beneath this ideal image, Emily harbored a deep loneliness. John's recent job as a security consultant for a prominent firm demanded much of his time and energy, often keeping him away from home for extended periods. The frequent travel left Emily alone to care for their two children and manage their household. While John's work brought prestige, it also created a distance between him and his family that left Emily feeling isolated. Though she kept busy with community events and church activities, her longing for connection grew more pronounced with every passing day. Father Mark, the newly appointed priest at St. Mary's Church, became a beacon of inspiration for the town. His impassioned sermons attracted more people each week, and he had a natural gift for understanding the personal struggles of his parishioners. To those who confided in him, he offered solace and compassion. Emily, too, found herself drawn to his warmth and insight, seeking comfort in his presence. She began volunteering more frequently at the church, hoping to fill the emotional void left by John's increasing absences. As John's time away lengthened, Emily's connection with Father Mark deepened. What had started as a simple companionship grew into something more, as she found herself relying on him for support and understanding. But as their bond intensified, it set off a chain of events that would lead to betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimately, a tragic conclusion that shattered the lives of everyone involved. Emily found in Father Mark a confidant, someone who listened intently and without judgment. Their conversations became increasingly personal, deepening with each meeting. Beneath Father Mark's compassionate exterior lay hidden ambitions and desires. Recognizing Emily's vulnerability, he subtly drew her closer, sparking an intimacy that would soon be impossible to conceal. The whispers of scandal began quietly, as they often do in small towns like Meadowbrook, where secrets rarely stay hidden. John, oblivious to his wife's growing closeness with the priest, remained focused on his career. Proud of his role as a security consultant for high-profile clients, he was dedicated to crafting strategies that safeguarded lives against unseen dangers. Yet he remained unaware of the unseen turmoil taking root within his own household. Father Mark had arrived in Meadowbrook as the new priest at St. Mary's Church, quickly winning over the congregation. His sermons were inspiring, his advice sound, and his presence deeply comforting. He had a way of connecting with people that made them feel understood and supported, especially Emily. As an active member of the church, Emily found herself increasingly drawn to his charisma and warmth. Initially, Emily and Father Mark's relationship was innocent, driven by Emily's desire for companionship in the wake of John's prolonged absences. As she shared her struggles, Father Mark listened, providing a sense of solace that she hadn't felt in a long time. What began as faith-based discussions and mutual support gradually evolved into something deeper, as Emily felt truly seen and valued by someone for the first time in years. Father Mark, equally captivated by Emily's openness and vulnerability, soon found himself attracted to her, not only as a member of his parish, but as a woman. Their encounters became more frequent and increasingly private, taking place in quiet, secluded parts of the church. Boundaries between priest and parishioner began to blur, and an intense, unspoken tension grew between them. The illicit thrill of their hidden affection fueled their connection, each shared glance and whispered conversation drawing them closer. As their bond intensified, Emily and Father Mark began meeting outside of church grounds, under the pretense of spiritual guidance. They took long walks in the countryside, their discussions filled with shared secrets, laughter, and a budding intimacy. Physical touches, once accidental, became lingering, and their emotional closeness quickly transformed into physical passion. In the shadows, away from prying eyes, they succumbed to a forbidden affair, hearts racing with both desire and the intoxicating thrill of secrecy. This dangerous liaison, however, would soon spiral out of control, leaving their lives, and the town of Meadowbrook, forever changed. Each clandestine meeting between Emily and Father Mark was charged with the thrill of crossing forbidden boundaries, heightening the powerful connection between them. The weight of their secret became a constant, a reminder of the rules they were defying. Every touch, every shared glance, every quiet moment alone was filled with the forbidden nature of their bond, making their affair all the more irresistible. As their relationship deepened, Emily and Father Mark grew increasingly consumed, their thoughts and actions revolving around one another. They became reckless, meeting in increasingly risky places and leaving behind subtle hints of their indiscretion. Emily's demeanor began to change, her once calm and steady nature replaced by a noticeable restlessness and distance from John. Father Mark, too, was affected. His sermons took on a passionate edge, reflecting the inner conflict he felt as he wrestled with guilt over his vows. Despite his turmoil, he couldn't bring himself to end things with Emily. Their affair brought a thrill and sense of fulfillment he had never felt before. John, initially unaware of the affair, soon began to notice changes in Emily's behavior. Her frequent late nights at the church, secretive phone calls, and newfound coldness toward him all suggested that something was amiss. As his suspicions grew, he began to piece together clues of Emily's betrayal, and his once stable world began to fall apart. In Meadowbrook, a town where secrets were hard to keep, the subtle shifts in Emily and Father Mark did not go unnoticed. Gossip spread quickly, with the scandalous affair becoming a topic of whispered conversations and furtive glances among the townspeople. As the affair continued, a darker truth came to light. Father Mark had a history of similar indiscretions. Emily was not the first woman he had seduced under the pretense of spiritual guidance. Several other women in the community, once charmed by his charisma, came forward with their own stories of secret encounters and illicit relationships. This revelation cast a sinister shadow over Father Mark's relationship with Emily, changing how the community viewed the once beloved priest. Instead of respect, he was now met with suspicion and disdain. As the affair spiraled further, Father Mark's actions grew desperate. Determined to keep his secrets hidden, he became increasingly willing to take any measures necessary to protect himself, setting the stage for a dangerous and inevitable confrontation that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. Desperate to protect his secrets, Father Mark crossed a dangerous line. One evening, David, a regular parishioner, stumbled upon Father Mark and Emily in a moment of intimacy in the confessional booth. Shocked and outraged, David confronted Father Mark, threatening to expose the priest unless he confessed. Terrified that his pristine image would be destroyed, Father Mark concocted a dark plan. He persuaded David to meet him in the church's bell tower, claiming they needed to talk in private. It was a quiet, moonless night, ideal for what Father Mark intended. As they stood near the edge of the tower, David grew increasingly emotional, his voice rising with anger. Unseen by David, Father Mark edged closer, waiting for the right moment. Then, in one swift, calculated move, Father Mark pushed him. David's eyes widened in shock as he stumbled backward, his arms flailing desperately for something to hold on to. But there was nothing to break his fall. His scream pierced the night as he plummeted down, the silence broken by the sickening thud as his body hit the ground. Blood pooled around him, his limbs twisted unnaturally. Looking down from the tower, Father Mark's heart raced. The sight was horrifying, but he also felt an unsettling sense of relief. His secret was safe. Hastily, he descended the stairs and checked to ensure no one had witnessed the scene. Confident he was alone, he dragged David's body into a concealed area in the church basement, hiding it beneath old, seldom-used items. His hands trembled, but Father Mark forced himself to appear normal, continuing with his duties as if nothing had happened. He maintained a calm, composed demeanor during Mass, even as people began to notice David's unexplained absence. Without a body, however, David's disappearance remained a mystery. Father Mark comforted his congregation, expressing concern for David, all while hiding his guilt behind a mask of compassion. As time went by, the inquiries about David grew quieter, eventually fading away. Father Mark resumed his role as a spiritual guide to the community, offering comfort and counsel while concealing his dark secret. Yet he was plagued by a constant sense of dread, each unexpected sound or shadow filling him with fear. He had taken an enormous risk, and though he believed he had no choice, the weight of what he had done lingered in his mind, haunting him with every passing day. Unaware of the lengths Father Mark had gone to, Emily continued their affair, though she sensed a change in him, a darkness he couldn't quite conceal. Whenever she voiced her concerns, he dismissed them with a reassuring smile, attempting to convince himself he could bury his guilt as he had buried David. Yet, the burden of his actions weighed on him, each day a struggle to keep up his facade. The police investigation into David's disappearance eventually went cold, with no evidence or leads to implicate Father Mark in the crime. Gradually, he started to believe he was in the clear, though the memory of that night haunted his sleep and cast a shadow over every waking moment. He thought he had silenced David, but his conscience tormented him relentlessly. Meanwhile, John felt the strain in his marriage. He had built his life with Emily on trust, love, and shared dreams, but a rift had grown between them. Emily was distant, often lost in thought and increasingly absent from home. Suspicion gnawed at John, compelling him to discover the truth. One overcast afternoon, he decided to follow Emily. His pursuit led him to St. Mary's Church, where he watched her enter the sanctuary. Heart pounding, he quietly slipped inside and hid behind the altar, determined to uncover what had been troubling him. From his concealed position, John observed Emily and Father Mark together. Emily looked different, alive in a way he hadn't seen in months, her face lit with a happiness that stirred a painful recognition within him. Father Mark, known for his warmth and charm, stood closer to her than seemed appropriate, touching her arm with an intimacy that ignited fury within John. The sight confirmed his worst fears. His wife was having an affair with the priest they both trusted. Overwhelmed with a mix of anger and heartbreak, John couldn't hold back. He burst from his hiding place, startling both Emily and Father Mark. Emily's face went pale, and Father Mark, usually composed, was visibly shaken. What followed was a fierce confrontation charged with raw emotion. John's voice, thick with betrayal, echoed through the church as he demanded answers, each word heavy with the agony of his shattered trust. "How could you do this to me?" John shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "To us, to our family." Emily, caught off guard, struggled for words, tears welling up in her eyes. "John, it's not what you think," she stammered, though the guilt made her voice falter. Father Mark, desperate to calm the explosive situation, raised his hands in a plea for peace. "John, please, listen," he said, his voice heavy with desperation. "This wasn't supposed to happen. It's more complicated than you think." But John, heartbroken and furious, was beyond consolation. "Complicated?" he spat out, his voice seething with pain. "You betrayed me, betrayed everything we stood for." His fists clenched, his body shook with rage, and the air between them grew thick with tension. Overcome by fury, John lunged at Father Mark. The priest, normally calm and composed, was thrust into a desperate struggle to defend himself and the dark secret he held. His eyes scanned the room frantically until he spotted a large crucifix near the altar. Driven by fear, he grabbed it. In a blur of panic, Father Mark swung the crucifix, the heavy object landing with a sickening thud against John's head. Blood spattered from the impact, but John, driven by rage, tried to advance again. Terrified, Father Mark swung harder, each strike more frenzied than the last, the sounds of cracking bone and tearing flesh echoing through the church. The brutal final blow crushed John's skull, leaving him lifeless in a pool of blood at the altar's base. The crucifix, now soaked in blood, slipped from Father Mark's trembling hands as he looked down in horror at the bloody, shattered remains of his once close friend. Emily, paralyzed by shock, stared at the gruesome scene, overwhelmed by grief and horror. The love and dreams she once cherished lay shattered before her. She collapsed beside John's lifeless body, her heartbroken cries filling the silence that followed the violence. Father Mark, panting and drenched in blood, felt the crushing weight of his actions. Overcome by panic, he fled the church, escaping both the scene of his crime and the guilt that would forever haunt him. He didn't look back, but the red and blue lights of police cars soon flooded the narrow streets of Meadowbrook, racing toward the tragic scene. Emily, numb and traumatized, called 911, her voice trembling as she described the horrific events. Meanwhile, Father Mark ran through the deserted streets. The church that once symbolized sanctuary now transformed into a labyrinth of betrayal and dread. As dawn broke over Meadowbrook, word of John's murder spread quickly through the town. The police launched a thorough investigation, scouring every corridor of St. Mary's Church for evidence. In a hidden corner of the basement, they stumbled upon another horrifying discovery: David's twisted body, concealed beneath dusty relics. Now they knew. 2 lives had been lost, both claimed by the same man's descent into darkness. The revelation shocked the community. Father Mark, once seen as a trusted leader, was now a wanted man, viewed as a monster by those who had once respected him. The police searched every corner of the church for answers, peeling back layers of deceit, revealing the sinister depths of his betrayal. With the entire town on edge, the hunt for Father Mark began. Police units mobilized, determined to bring him to justice and end the nightmare he had wrought upon Meadowbrook. "We have a suspect on the run. Father Mark is considered armed and dangerous. Approach with caution," came the urgent message over the police radio. Father Mark moved quickly, darting through the town's narrow alleys and hidden paths, his mind racing for an escape plan. He knew the police would be closing in soon, and his only chance of evading capture was to reach the dense woods at the town's edge, where he could vanish into the shadows of the trees. Detective Miller, a seasoned investigator known for her relentless dedication to justice, coordinated the manhunt with precision. Having spent years working in Meadowbrook, she anticipated Father Mark's movements, ordering roadblocks at all major exits and dispatching officers to search the streets and surrounding areas. Father Mark's heart pounded as he neared the outskirts of town. The dark forest loomed ahead, offering him a fleeting hope of escape. He cast a quick glance behind him, catching the flicker of police lights and the distant wail of sirens. Summoning the last of his energy, he plunged into the woods, gripped by a mix of terror and desperation. The forest was thick and unforgiving, its underbrush tugging at his clothes and slowing his progress. He stumbled over twisted roots and rocks, his breath ragged as he pushed forward. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sent waves of panic through him, fearing that the police were closing in. The weight of his actions settled heavily on him, and his mind became a chaotic swirl of regret and self-preservation. As he moved deeper into the dark woods, guilt gnawed at him, but his survival instincts kept him running. Meanwhile, Detective Miller led a team of officers into the forest, their flashlights cutting through the foggy morning light. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the once peaceful forest now felt like a trap closing around Father Mark. Miller's calm, determined voice carried through the trees. "Spread out! He can't have gone far," she ordered, noting the broken branches and disturbed foliage that marked his path. The tracking dogs, trained and eager, barked and strained at their leashes, picking up his trail. The officers moved methodically, following the faint signs left behind by their fugitive. Father Mark's strength began to fade as he struggled deeper into the forest, his thoughts a tangled mess of escape plans, guilt, and the shadow of the crime he couldn't outrun. He couldn't stop thinking about Emily, the woman whose unknowing role had triggered this tragic sequence of events. The weight of his sins pressed down on him, leaving him near breaking. He even began to consider one final, desperate way to escape justice. Suddenly, the barking of police dogs shattered the stillness, and panic surged through Father Mark. Realizing time was almost up, he broke into a frantic sprint, but fear and exhaustion clouded his senses. He stumbled into a clearing, only to be greeted by the blinding beams of police flashlights. "Freeze! Put your hands where we can see them." Detective Miller's firm voice cut through the darkness. Panting and defeated, Father Mark raised his blood-stained hands and sank to his knees, feeling the crushing weight of his actions. The officers moved in quickly, securing him in handcuffs. As they led him away, the bite of the cold metal around his wrists felt like a physical manifestation of his guilt. In a moment of sheer despair, Father Mark attempted to take his own life. While the officers were briefly distracted, he lunged toward a sharp rock, trying to end his torment then and there. But the officers reacted swiftly, pulling him back and restraining him more securely. His failed attempt only deepened his misery. As the sun rose fully over Meadowbrook, the once peaceful town witnessed the dramatic capture of its fallen priest. Father Mark's fate was sealed by his own dark deeds. The manhunt had ended, but the scars it left on the community would linger for years to come. Taken into custody, Father Mark's mind was a whirlwind of regret and despair. The trial was swift, with overwhelming evidence. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sitting in his cell, the cold reality sank in. The iron bars and concrete walls were a constant reminder of his sins and the lives he had shattered. In prison, Father Mark faced the torment of his conscience daily. Any attempts to find redemption were met with the harsh reality of his actions. The whispers of other inmates, the isolation, and the knowledge of the pain he'd caused weighed on him constantly. He had tried to escape justice, but now he would spend the rest of his life confronting it head-on. The community of Meadowbrook began the long road to healing, though the memory of Father Mark's betrayal and the events that followed remained etched in their minds. The church, once a haven of comfort, stood now as a reminder of the darkness that had briefly touched their town. And so Father Mark served out his life sentence, haunted by the memories of his past and his failed escape. The tragic betrayal left Meadowbrook forever changed. Could John have ever foreseen the depth of betrayal awaiting him? Was Emily's search for comfort destined to end in such devastation? And what of Father Mark, whose secrets and desperate acts tore a community apart? How would Meadowbrook ever fully heal from such a profound tragedy? Thank you for joining us in uncovering this haunting tale. Click here for another true crime story.